Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Welborn, and this is Faith Baptist Church Sunday School. We'll be looking at Luke chapter 2. It is the final Sunday before Christmas. If you tune in on December 19th at 7:30 p.m. PBS, you will see a Charlie Brown Christmas special, and that also will have Luke 2 in it. It's one of the only Christmas specials that has the Bible message as far as the biblical aspects of Christmas. So anyway, and it's a short little monologue by Linus, but those of you who are familiar with it, anyway, Luke 2 is what we're going to be looking at this morning, though. And if you've ever moved or had to relocate from one community to another, that's what Joseph and Mary basically were having to do. They went to Bethlehem. And I remember when I was 11 years old, we moved back to the High Point Trinity area. We had lived in Winston-Salem up until I was 11 years old. I was a baby when we moved. And so we had established friends there. The school, I'd grown up there, and the school there in Davidson County. And so moving was not easy, although it was not across the United States. Still, it was not easy to move and relocate from one community to another. So they faced this, and remember what had happened with Joseph and Mary. He had said, oh goodness, she's pregnant. How did this happen? I think I may just kind of put her away. The angel of the Lord came to him and said, or an angel of the Lord came to him and said, it's okay. This is something that's part of God's plan. And so he then left with Mary to go back to Bethlehem, which was their ancestral home, which was where King David was born as well. So when you hear about Bethlehem being the city of David, although David spent a lot of his time in Jerusalem, he was technically born in Bethlehem. So you have that ancestral home, having to go back as far as a census, and them traveling back to Bethlehem. And so if you look here in Luke 2, verses 4 through 7, Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house of the family line of David, to be registered along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was pregnant. You guys remember whenever we had to do the big census booklets, when those used to come out and you had to fill it out and it was tedious. And then now it's online. You can go on and do the census online. Maybe I'm the only person that does that, but we just had one not too long ago. I want to say last year. My time frame is way off. So 2 years ago, last year, 3 years ago, not sure. But still, this was similar back then because they wanted to keep track of who all was in the area. It was basically governed by Rome. And so there was taxes involved. And that's how, like Matthew. Little side note about Luke. Luke was not part of the original 12 disciples. Sometimes people say, yeah, Luke was a disciple, but he was not. He was a later convert that Paul had led to Christ. And so he was not Jewish. He was Greek. And so he wrote the Gospel of Luke, but also he also was the author of the book of Acts. Now, he got this information from Mary. And we'll see that where Mary said she kept these things in her heart. So she basically kept a diary. So Luke interviewed Mary, and that's where he got a lot of this information. So little side note there to give you some information about this, where this came from. And so in verse 6, while they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him tightly in cloth, and laid him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. You know, we tend to think of they came to the inn and there was an angry, grumpy guy and he said no, and they had to stay out in a manger and a wooden stick type thing in a wooden manger. Probably what happened, I mean, truthfully, they checked around and there's just no availability. I went to the Trinity Wheatmore basketball game this week, and I went to the boys varsity. That's the time that I got there, and it started around 7:30, and I got there around 7:40. Yeah, I had a hard time finding a seat. There was no room in the inn. And it wasn't like people were mean and saying, seats taken, or anything like that. It was just, there was just no room. And so that's probably what happened whenever they got there to Bethlehem, because everybody was crowding into one spot, and there was just no room. They found a place in a stable, and that's where Jesus was born. Possibly a cave type structure. It wasn't a wooden stick type thing like we have in our yards, but possibly something kind of hewn out of the side of some rock. And they think also that the manger was probably kind of another stone type manger, instead of the traditional stick type thing that we see with the baby Jesus in it. It was a stone type structure. So anyway, side notes, giving you a little bit of context. Luke 2 verses 8 through 12. In the same region, shepherds were staying out in the fields, keeping watch at their flock, overnight at their flock. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around about them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. Look, I proclaim to you good news of great joy that will be for all people. Today in the city of David, a Savior was born to you, who is the Messiah, the Lord. And this will be a sign unto you, for you will find the babe wrapped tightly in cloth, laying in a manger." That's the portion that Linus recites in A Charlie Brown Christmas. Again, tune in to PBS December 19th at 7:30 p.m. You will see this. But it's interesting to think about the shepherds and the announcement. At first, they were terrified. In the King James, it says they were sore afraid. And that literally means that they had this megaphobia, that they were just extremely startled and confused at what was happening. And you can imagine being out, all you had was starlight, no city lights, and then something really bright, and a person shows up. And we think they had possibly the form of like a man, like a person, an angelic form. And there was the heavenly host shown around about them. There was a multitude declaring the birth of Jesus. And it's amazing, too, to think about it. The King, the Savior of the world, and the first people that hear the announcement are shepherds, random shepherds in a field somewhere. And that shows, starting at Christ's humility, that he was humble from the start. He took his place out of heaven and relocated for us to earth. You think about where they said, "Do not be afraid," the angels, it's comforting. And then the inspirational message, that joy message that Jesus is born. Luke 2, as we continue, verses 16 through 20, the shepherds hurried and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. And after seeing them, they rejoiced in the message that they were told about this child. So they rejoiced in that message. And all who heard it were amazed. And the shepherds said this to them. But Mary was treasuring all these things in her heart and meditating on them. That the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had seen and heard, which were just as they'd been told. That little line about, in verse 19, but Mary was treasuring all these things in her heart, basically, I don't know if she had a written diary or if she was really just memorizing those things. And as a parent, you memorize and you think about those milestone times, or those times, especially the birth of a child, and you can tell people about it. You can recite that to them. And so Luke was an eyewitness, or was interviewing Mary, as obviously she was an eyewitness to the event. And that's where Luke's source was directly from Mary. And so you see that whenever he refers to that she treasured those things in her heart. As I mentioned earlier about relocating, I relocated from one community to another. And you think about Christ, how he came down from glory to be our Savior. At that point in time, taking himself away from his glorious throne, his place in heaven, to be just a humble baby there, and to go through what it's like to be a human, to understand that aspect in life. The Man and the Birds, the story that Paul Harvey, and I may have mentioned this in another lesson, but I think about that at Christmas time. They play that sometimes on 95.5 FM. It's Bible Broadcasting Network. But they'll play it during the month of December. And basically the point of that is he saw a bunch of birds flying around, and the man wanted to get the birds into shelter and help them into the barn so they'd stay warm, that sort of thing. And there was no way he could communicate to the birds to tell them, fly into the barn, go into the barn for safety, whatever. You can't speak bird. And so he said, if I could just become a bird and lead them into the barn for safety and warmth, then the birds would be okay. And that's what, and it was a blizzard, by the way. And so, in the story. And so truly, we think about Jesus, his way of communicating to us. If you look at the Old Testament and you see the way the communication was performed to man, and how these were outlaid to men as far as the biblical knowledge. And then the Christmas story was that ultimate starting of the sacrifice, that rescue mission, but also a way of Jesus communicating with us, saying, I know what it's like to be a person. I know what it's like to be human, and to understand what it's like to go through life like this. Wonderful message. Hope everybody has a very Merry Christmas.